Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this conversation with Theology and Religious Studies Professor Sam Mickey and three artists from All That You Touch Art and Ecology, Nicole Dixon, Connie McKenzie, and Manoush Zamarodiniya. My name is Nell Herbert, and I'm the Thatcher Gallery Manager. While this exhibition is in person, most of our public programs for the show are online. This conversation is the third in a series of artist panels. If you missed the previous two, you will be able to find recordings soon on Thatcher Gallery's YouTube channel. The link will be in the chat. Additionally, we have two upcoming events happening next week, both on Wednesday, October 13th. From 12 to 1, we'll be hosting an in-person Thatcher Art Hour in the USF Community Garden. And from 6:30 to 8, we're excited to co-present an event titled Indigenous Foodways, a conversation and cooking demonstration with Vincent Medina and Louis Trevino of Mak'amham, Contemporary Ohlone Cuisine. This online event is co-sponsored by the Jesuit Foundation's 6+U initiative, along with Environmental Studies and the Cultural Anthropology program. To register, please visit the events page on Thatcher Gallery's website. We'd like to begin this afternoon with a land acknowledgement. The Thatcher Gallery at the University of San Francisco sits on the unceded land of the Ramaytush-speaking people of the Yelamu tribe, one of approximately 50 independent nations now referred to as Ohlone. The Ohlone people are still here, working for their right to remain and evolve in the place we consider San Francisco. In recognition that we all benefit from this land, we encourage you to learn about the indigenous communities in the spaces you inhabit, acknowledge the difficult truths of our shared histories and the ways in which these continue to shape our lives, inform yourself about current land issues and become a steward of these cultures and ecologies, and center and amplify Indigenous voices in these spaces. We acknowledge the rich cultural heritage that has survived colonization and genocide, and honor Ohlone artists past, present, and future. We've also shared a Bay Area resource in the chat. Before I hand it over, I'd like to introduce the exhibition as well as our speakers for the event. All That You Touch, Art and Ecology presents artists whose creative practices are informed by their personal encounters with the natural world. Working across the disciplines, these 10 artists ask what nature can teach us about adaptation, regeneration, and healing. What can nature teach us about ourselves? We're excited to be here with you virtually and hope to also see you in person in the gallery through November 7th. This is the first of 3 exhibitions this year, which are all focusing on ecology and environmental justice. I just want to say a huge thank you to our many collaborators for this exhibition and also for today's event, including the Center for Research, Artistic, and Scholarly Excellence. Okay, so now to introduce our speakers. We're happy to be able to collaborate again with our moderator, Professor Sam Mickey. Sam Mickey is an adjunct professor in the Theology and Religious Studies Department at the University of San Francisco. He has also taught at Dominican University of California, Pacifica Graduate Institute, and the California Institute of Integral Studies, and he has worked for the Forum on Religion and Ecology at Yale. His research and teaching interests include environmental ethics, religion and ecology, and integral ecology. Professor Mickey has authored, contributed to, and edited multiple texts. He was a contributing writer and served as the editor for the Lane Center's recently published Integrating Ecology and Justice in a Changing Climate, which features scholarship from other USF professors and All That You Touch contributors. We're so grateful to you, Sam, for the time and energy that you put into collaborating with the gallery and the artists on this event. Thank you. Now, the artists that we'll be hearing from today. Nicole Dixon is an Oakland native. Her mixed media pieces center and pay homage to Black experiences and identity. Connie McKenzie has trained in a variety of dance styles. Her dance film work has been featured in film festivals all over the country and several places around the globe. Manoush Zamaradiniya is an Iranian-born interdisciplinary artist whose artwork is inspired by her environment. She has exhibited both locally and internationally. Artists, please remember to turn on your video and speaker when it's your turn to speak, and then to turn both off when you're done. And then we'll all turn it back on during the discussion and Q&A with Sam. So now I will hand it over to Professor Mickey.
Thanks so much, Nell, and thanks to everybody at the Thatcher Gallery for having me around. I really appreciate this opportunity to work with Nicole and Connie and Manoush at this really beautiful exhibit and haunting exhibit. There's a lot of power in this kind of art. I'll be brief because I really just want to facilitate some discussion and hear from the artists and hear your questions from you viewers. But basically, the idea is we're talking today about ecology and culture. Right? Art and ecology, we think of art as being cultural, but not necessarily about nature or about ecology. So, here's the thing. We're in an ecological crisis. That's no secret. The future of life on Earth is at stake. The future of humankind is at stake. And this isn't just a crisis about something out there called nature. It's also very much a crisis about us, humans, our societies, our values, our religions, our cultures. So ecology really undoes the very idea of a separation between nature and culture. Ecology is about interconnectedness. It's about relations, right? There is no away. Away is just another place that we are connected to. Culture versus nature, mind versus matter, people versus the planet. These things don't really make sense. They're actually connected. People are inseparable from the planet, despite people's desires to live on Mars. That has yet to happen. So social justice, inseparable from environmental justice. So my work in general is really about bringing cultures, religions, ethics, and philosophies and art into ecological thought. Ecological issues can't just be addressed through scientific or technological means alone, right? I mean, facts and data are wonderful, but they don't facilitate the kind of behavior change we need to make the world a more beautiful place. If facts could solve the problems, they already would. But they're not getting people motivated. They're not getting people thinking and feeling differently to get them to care, to get them to act. Facts need interpretation. They need meaning. And that comes from stories and symbols, cultural values, imagination, right? So we need a change in our moral character. And science and technology, well, they're great. Art can drive this kind of a change because it gets us to think and feel differently about who we are. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live in a place? What does it mean to be part of a planetary civilization? If we're going to solve our environmental crisis, we need to envision a better world. And it's art that helps us inspire this kind of vision, specifically the art that we're reflecting on today. So I don't want to say much more than that because these artists have the visions that I'm talking about that help reconnect people with the planet, that help draw connections between social justice and environmental justice, that reconnect our minds with our bodies and cross the boundaries between nature and culture. So I'll leave it there, and I'm looking forward to hearing the questions that will be generated from this kind of discussion. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here, and thank you so much, Sam, for that riveting and poignant kickoff today. Really, my art is about the intersection of all that you just touched on. My art does center the Black experience because I am a Black woman living in this skin, in this country, on this planet at this time, when there are so many changes happening, and yet there are so many things that have not changed, right? Over the course of 400 years, or plus over the course of 400 years, Black people in this country have been in the exact state of crisis that Sam just talked about. And it's no less different today. It won't be any less different tomorrow, right? So my work is really around creating archetypes and sharing archetypes that can help guide us and can help bring some healing and really a catharsis. When we're talking about all these complex problems, these complex issues, these very urgent issues. And my work really tries to highlight tools. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons why I was so excited about this exhibition is that nature is already a prominent element of my work, if you could call it an element. If you can say that an element is something when you're actually in it, right? I'm in nature and of nature, but it does feature very prominently in my work. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited about this exhibition, because I get a chance to really highlight those elements. So the first work that's on screen now is called Stardust Permutation, and it really is about this transcendental identity, this identity that transcends time and place. It transcends even my personality. So, nature has so many lessons for us, and we know that nature is what all our bodies are made out of, right? We're made of actual stardust. All the elements in our bodies were forged in these ancient stars billions and billions of years ago. And just thinking about how awe-inspiring that is, and thinking about using that knowledge as a tool to be able to ground and center and draw strength and find healing and resilience in the face of media and society that tells me and tells people that look like me that they are less than, that they are 3/5 of a human being, or that they are 0/5 of a human being, there's no consequence at all to taking life. And this piece in particular is really about that eternal connection that I can find that inspires me to continue on and to persevere in spite of all that I'm facing, in spite of all that Black people have faced for hundreds of years. And I'm also using a lot of symbols in my work, symbols that both come from nature and culture, right? So you'll see in this particular image here, you'll see some Batalur eagles in the back, which culturally speaking in Zulu culture represent like the alpha and omega stories. The stories say that the Batalur eagle was the first creature to fall from the tree of life and beat its wings to announce creation, right? And that it will be the last creature when this era ends. And the figure's clothing here, she's got a fern pattern on her clothes, and ferns are really amazing ancient plants that have all sorts of interesting fractal properties. And then there's a cultural symbol there on the redwood. That's actual redwood applied to the canvas there. That symbol is a Adinkra symbol, which is a West African language of symbols, and it represents time changes. So this piece really is about an eternal identity that is full of wonder and is complete and intact and whole and is lacking nothing despite our environment and circumstances. Thank you and I have one more slide. I believe one more slide is popping up. And all of the work that I have been creating for the past few years, for the past decade or so, is mixed media. And that's because every element that I'm using, whether it's something from nature like the redwood you see there, or whether it's the charcoal that the figures are rendered in, or whether it's cloth fabric or gold leaf, all of the elements that are used have a different vibration, a different resonance that can really create its own language and create its own energy that's really dynamic, and they can kind of capture the dynamics of and the depth and complexity of the themes that I'm trying to reflect. And this piece, The Axe Forgets but the Tree Remembers, is really about using nature and some of the principles of nature to not only help inform our identities, but also to help inform our walk and our path. And this piece is about grief and using the example of a redwood tree in order to find strength in being and healing. The redwood tree, whenever it gets injured or has an infection or some disease or some fire has ravaged the forest, you know, redwood trees are the oldest, these types of trees are the oldest living beings on the planet, and they survive by being able to kind of wall off the area of the injury to protect itself from further contamination. And they're able to grow these new cells and just kind of continue on. So if you were to dissect a redwood tree, you would actually be able to see every single scar, every single wound, every injury. And I find inspiration in that as a person who has, you know, who is definitely struggling with how to grieve, how to properly grieve. And there are so many different things to grieve, all of us. None of us gets through Earth School without you know, grief at some point, and suffering and struggle of some kind, right? So this piece really is about how we can still bear our wounds and continue on. And there's a bit of a reprieve here that's depicted where the central figure is held by an ancestral figure. And again, I'm using some symbols. There's color on the ancestral figure's hand in order to denote kind of like an anointing and a spiritual presence and power. And then the symbol above is a metaphysical symbol for the flower of life, which really represents this sacred geometry that really represents the blueprint of knowledge, the archive of existence, and that we really do have a purpose. You know, that does include all that happens to us, you know, and includes all that we experience. And it also includes our resilience, and it includes how we survive and how we thrive amidst it all. So my work is inextricable from nature because I'm inextricable from nature. So I'm really excited to be a part of this show. And we'll be able to talk more about it, I believe, at the end. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Connie. I was the filmmaker and editor for Lungs of the Earth. Lungs of the Earth, as described by the program description, is a hybrid exploration of movement, sound, and film, capturing the socio-political inferno and environmental crisis consuming the Amazon region of Brazil and its indigenous communities. So what do we mean by that, right? So the film talks about the mass deforestation happening in Brazil currently due to the government pretty much allowing land to be burned for cattle ranching. And that's kind of the central theme of the film. And it talks not only about what's actually happening, but also kind of goes into the absurdity of it, you know, like why would a leader not want to preserve its country and its land and protect the land of the indigenous communities? And then kind of goes into what happens when we ignore an issue like this, right? The Amazon is the greatest resource of oxygen and so many other ecosystems in the world. And the fact that it's burning is something that we should all really be frightened about. And, you know, I think in a lot of ways, this film does try to at least touch upon some of those more emotional points of what happens when we don't address the issues kind of related to not only the mass deforestation, but climate change in general. And so one of the things that we wanted this to do was not only inform the viewer of what was happening, but also incite people to take action. And so, you know, we want people to listen to the voices and just also listen to the message of the film. I think one of the things that's really easy for us as a nation to do sometimes is ignore the things that are happening around the world because we want to fix ourselves first. And the thing is, an issue like this really affects everybody. And so one of the things we want everyone to realize is how important just being aware of everything that's happening in the world, especially in relation to climate change, is in everyone's individual lives. Um, Second is we are hoping that people will just take more time to learn a little bit more about it. The film mostly is, it's a movement piece. And so there isn't a lot of talking about what happens. It is outlined. The story is outlined throughout the work, but overall, we do hope that people do go and take a look at the FUNAI, National Indian Foundations of Brazil, and the Amazon Conservation Team. I can link those below. They're two organizations that are fighting to really preserve the land rights in Brazil and just confront what's really going on. And then, I think, of course, as Americans, we hope that people use their privilege for good. One of the greatest gifts of this film was, for me at least, just getting to work on it. And so, I think there's an element of, as an artist, the ideas that you work on have to always be your own and always have to be something central to your life, right? And I was asked to come onto this film as just someone just to film and edit. The idea was completely baked out by the time that I was onboarded. And it was such a gift because I didn't even realize how big of an issue this was until I started working on it. And so ever since then, it's made me just a lot more aware of what's happening down there and kind of aware of the actions that I can take as well to kind of help combat this. And I think, as an artist, that's the greatest gift that I could get. And so one of the things that I think is really central to the themes of Lungs of the Earth is this idea of interconnectedness, right? So this film was made by three people, one of them being myself, the first person being the choreographer and conceptor, Felicitas, and our sound designer, Jaime. And so it's really cool because this film was made on such a short timeline that all three of us really had to be in cohesion in order for it to work. And in a lot of ways, I kind of relate that to what Sam was talking about earlier. Social justice being related to environmental justice and, all of those things being connected to art somehow. Same thing with this film. The three movement, sound, and film pieces are really essential to tell the story. I think the movement does a really good job of really kind of just taking us through the timeline, while the sound really kind of hits our emotional points a lot better and describes in a way that's really digestible and, verbal what's happening. And the filming itself, it was a process of getting to know the space and using it to tell the story even better, right? And so similarly to the interconnectedness of art, ecology, and human social justice, I think, creating this film was a process of cohesion. It was a process of interconnectedness. And so we also hope that, we see art as a way to generate these changes, right? It doesn't really have to, it's not supposed to stop at art. I think it's easy to get, we get lost or inspired by pieces by this. And then afterwards, it almost it goes away, right? And so something we all hope is that besides watching the piece and getting inspired by it, that there is a actual change that happens from it, whether it's, you learn one thing about the Amazon and then you just apply it to your life, even if it's just maybe not hitting up the fast food joints so often, right? That's my example, because they're big consumers in cattle ranching, right? And, there are small things that we can all do that really help the interconnectedness of the ecosystem and, how we see these processes play out. And that's one of the biggest themes, not only of the film, but also as my own work. I find that anything that I work on is an all-consuming process. I think very similarly to what Nicole said, I am also very connected to nature. When I was creating this piece, I spent a lot of time on location. And this was, kind of prior to everyone showing up because we only actually had 2 days together in person. One being the film day. And so I think, kind of getting really grounded in that space was one of the things that I think made this really successful. All of that to say is this piece in a lot of ways just really opened my eyes to what it meant to make social justice oriented work. This was definitely my first major piece out of college as a dance filmmaker. And I think in so many ways, it's kind of really clarified what it is that I'm here to do, right? And so it was awesome to work on this piece because I got a greater understanding of, oh, I can actually use these talents of mine to promote things that are good. And I can use them to tell the stories that are not getting heard enough. And I can use them to help actually promote some social change. And I think that's also just the role of art in general, to really carry culture, to counteract it, to really help us digest it, and really take in things that might be too difficult to consume otherwise. I think we do live in a society of flooding. And so it's easy to just get bogged down by the many, many things that are coming at us. So we hope that the film is a way to kind of get an entry point that's digestible. I don't really think there's anything in there that's particularly triggering. You know, it's going to make you think, obviously, but we really like the film in a way that it just gets people's thoughts going and hopefully gets that conversation started on how we can make change. And I will pass that off. Thanks, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Okay. Hi, everybody. So wonderful to hear from other speakers. Beautiful work. Thank you. Thanks for having me an opportunity for talking about my work. My name is Minouche Zamorodinyan. I've been working as an interdisciplinary artist. I use a lot of different materials, different mediums in my work. And every time that I feel like I want to express my feeling, I think any form of art can express, I use it. Earlier in my work, I've been using a lot of, I'm interested in body and nature and how my body connects with the nature and how I can bring it in. You know, nature for me is kind of like a safe platform that I can express how I feel, how I reflect on what happens, reflect on my struggles, challenges in my life and daily life overall. I've been doing a lot of video installation performances, mostly make an object, create a space, and then activate a space with the body and action. I'm very interested in ritual and doing a lot between something that it can be used to document the experience, the moment. And a lot of my work respond and represent time and space. In this specific work is a video that I've been documenting back in Iran when I was there after 7 years. So it was very interesting for me to capture the moment and time that I was there. I was using this emergency blanket to kind of like represent the global warming, represents the immigration. A lot of my works has different layers all the time at the same time that you see the work. And a lot is resonate with my resistance, with my action, with my emotions. This and a lot of my work is about documentation. So it's like I use documentation as a form of work. For several years now, I started thinking about if I, just like using walking as a form of like catalyst that I can own a land. And it was just at the time responding to the time that the immigration policy was changed. And I was kind of responding to the moment that I walk on the land that doesn't belong to me, and now I own it and it's mine. And I work with a series of different works, documenting the moments that I've been walked as an experience, and also creating objects from the maps and routes. and I made the different, forms of sculptures. As you see, this is the installations. There's actually participatory, some sort. Virtual Land was a piece that I wanted people to come into a space and experience what I've been seeing and what I've been feeling through my walks. And at the same time, you see this technology that I'm using, this all video projections that are on the map. So I make those forms and shape of routes into 3D sculptures, and thinking about how the technology is changing our emotions, and how technology is changing our perceptions of what we see. And so what I've been showing here in the show is this piece that is, you can see at the time, actually, this was not made for this specific, but I proposed this for showing this piece because I thought that at the time that now we are so connected to digital age and using everything digitally, and we see and experience things. I've been documenting all these walks that I've done to different places, mostly natural environment, because as I said, I've been very close to nature and environment. And a lot, I actually respond a lot with 4 elements in my work. But specifically for this, when I was documenting my walks by photo imagery, I wanted to bring that feeling and experience of physically experience a place, but then using this memory and using this technology to make that shape into a new form. So it's like, looks like a puzzle, but at the same time looks like a topography forms. And the piece, the golden piece in the center is actually the piece called My Ziggurat, which is referencing Metaposemia, the ancient Metaposemia, that how it was kind of like connection between, using architecture, using the technology to translate those forms into newer project referencing the history and memory. So the pictures, the one thing about this is specific, not necessarily ecologically done, but I use gold leaf for the gold because it represents my history, which is like but also it's used for sacred spaces, gold, and also referencing the history of the Bay Area, especially San Francisco, as a referencing gold rush. But the images are all print on the leftover of the materials that I've used. And I think that's some sort of like how I feel like less guilty of printing and creating something as a, trash, for just thinking that how much we are responsible for being environmentally, how and thinking ecologically. I felt that maybe it's the good piece for this time that we are experiencing everything through technology and looking at nature, how it looks and how it's the perceptions and the memory of the place. Yeah, that's it. Let me see if I can stop sharing.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Manoush. And thanks to Connie, thanks to Nicole. These are really inspiring pieces. To anybody who's tuning in, who's around USF, make sure to actually check out the gallery. It's a different experience. It's wonderful to hear about, but you have to experience these artworks firsthand to really get the full impact. So we're gonna have some time for discussion now, and for anybody who wants to ask a question, type it in the Q&A, right? The Q&A section on Zoom here, not on the chat, on the Q&A, and we'll get to those in turn. And first, just because I'm the host, I get to take the floor, so I'm going to ask some of my questions first. And these are open to Nicole and to Connie and to Manoush, whoever wants to chime in whatever way. To some extent, you've already addressed a little bit of these questions, which is why they've kind of evoked more thinking from me. So first, Nicole mentioned we are made out of stardust. That's literally true, right? All the atoms in our body ultimately were prototyped in stars. That's how atoms were formed. Anything heavier than hydrogen, right? The Big Bang, hydrogen, gas, and eventually those turn into stars. Stars eventually turn into us. So you might say, because all art is also made out of stardust, that all art is already ecological, insofar as every medium of artistic expression involves environments, right? Whether it's painting or sculpture or dance or film or music or even digital media, right? Computers and digital technologies still depend on the material world. So if my artists can go ahead and turn their cameras on and sound and chime in on this question. How do you see connections between art and ecology in the media that you work with? How do different media express different feelings or emotions or perceptions of ecology? How is it in the very media? I like that, especially you all work with mixed media. You're all over the place with media. So I'm sure you can all get a sense for the differences between them. So yeah, any thoughts are welcome.
I can start, even though mine's more of a digital form. One thing I will say about working with any sort of camera and any sort is it does force you to kind of slow down and take in your environment. Part of the reason why I spent so long on location before shooting for Lungs of the Earth was I wanted to know how the light would look. I wanted to know kind of, what were my sources, what were the sounds of the place, how did the ground feel? And so I think what's been really enjoyable to me about working with the digital media is, I think we so often just run past some of the most beautiful things in our world. And the time it takes me to set my camera up to take a photo, like it just kind of forces me to actually be present. In addition to the work that I did for this film, I love taking nature photography. And one of the reasons why I like it so much is it just kind of forces me to take my time and just really take in kind of the tactile, like the tactility, is that a word? The actual physicalness of the spaces that I'm in instead of just kind of brushing by them.
That's lovely. Yeah, I mean, so much of what's wrong with our societies, it's just too fast. We're outpacing what evolution and ecology can actually handle. So the idea that you could slow down, take a breath, is really powerful and a great example that even digital technology is ecological. There's no need to be like, no, not the digital stuff. That's bad. We shouldn't use electricity or, like, no, you're finding the liberating potential of those media. That's wonderful. Any thoughts from Nicole or Manoush?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I just really, really am resonating with this idea that you're explaining, Connie. It kind of seems like there's an intangible element also that I know I'm definitely tuned in with when I'm making my work, and that probably is an important element that was also in those the Mother Star, right? Which is this energetic spiritual element. I don't know if it has anything to do with God particle or not, whatever it is. But, when you're talking about stopping and slowing down and just being present and integrating, using your senses and integrating, and that it transforms you, right? And affects you. And I definitely feel like the same thing is true in my work when I as the artist am using my materials, right? All of the figures are charcoal, and when I'm creating these figures, I'm really trying to imbue them with energy, and so I'm using my actual fingers and actual burnt wood on the paper and rubbing and altering, and doing this very alchemical, process, and then these figures are created, and all of a sudden there's like this little spark of energy that comes from this flat two-dimensional rendering, and that flat two-dimensional rendering that has these natural elements also has like a story that comes with the narrative, and that story and the narrative can be exchanged, across the any divide now, because we can just press a button and send an image across the world, right? So I definitely think that my experience of art is very tactile, and it also, in mixing media as well, and using all sorts of materials that have different energies, there's another sphere that's formed, there's another element that's created, there's another element that is forged, right, which is this energetic element. And that's kind of the meaning making part of the art for me, is that spiritual, that energetic exchange that happens when people are digesting this image, and when it has some kind of meaning for them, or when I'm making the image and it has some kind of meaning for me. So I think that it's ecological in so many ways.
That's great.
I
Manoush.
will add up to whatever you guys said, which for me, I think a lot of earlier in my work, I've been doing a lot of ephemeral work, and it's just like the documentation of the performative action that you see. And I think for me was a lot about my connection and intuitive moment that I spend in nature and environment. So seriously, I've been getting all this inspiration from the side and nature. So I feel like I actually get that, and I agree with both of you how this contemplation becomes sort of like an art piece or creative process of making something new. And I think one thing for me that I want to add to this is, intentionally not making objects. I wanted to just be an environmental artist, thinking about, as you said, Sam, earlier, that you're making digital and using this electricity, and now that we are producing these waste with the electronics, because every time you just have to upgrade your things, it makes me wonder, where am I going to go with this concept? Am I going to be survive, or thinking about being possible to be independent as an artist, and living like that, not producing. So I feel like a lot of guilt, even though using digital, even if we think that we are ecologically try to be as an artist. I think overall, I just want to add that too.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's such an important point to think of the waste streams that are always involved with what we do, and that's a part of life. And there's a certain amount of waste and ways of doing things that are totally healthy. That's what compost is about. And I think if you're going to use waste for making the world more beautiful, that's a great example of how some of this could be part of that composting process. And one of the interesting things I feel about all of your work too is that you've all mentioned how you're trying to facilitate changes of people's experience, their emotions, eliciting response from them. But you're not doing it the way a lot of environmentalists do it. There's kind of two things a lot of environmentalists normally do. One is they dump a lot of data on you, and there's just graphs and charts and facts and figures and numbers. And the other thing is they just tell you what to do, right? Like, don't drive that car, or eat less meat, or save energy, or whatever it is. And while those things might be good, somehow yelling them at people hasn't gotten the effect that we want. And there's something about art that communicates this message differently, right? It can be compelling without being condescending. Right. And it's just opening up a possibility for a new way of tuning into things. Right. It speaks with metaphor, not just literal meaning. It's experiential and emotional. It's not an explanation. Right. So I'm wondering, this kind of metaphorical way of communicating, this experiential, emotional way of communicating. Right. How is that in your art? How do symbols, stories, bodily experiences, how do those figure into your art and convey its artistic message?
I think seductively. I think that's the best answer that I could give. And I have seen it work. I'm talking about, in my work, I'm talking about centering the Black body. And so I'm using this very, very Black medium, unquestionably Black. It could not be any Blacker, right? And I have literally seen, I had my work on display one time, and I was there, but a few feet away. And this man, an older white man, walked past and just kind of stopped. And he hypnotized hypnotized his own self. He literally stood in front of this piece and just kept saying, "It's so black. It's so black. It's so black. It's so black," over and over and over again. And, you know, people were passing by, things were happening. He had no idea. He was just in a zone. He was transfixed by the sheer blackness of this huge figure, right? And, you know, who knows what he thinks about blackness, right? Who knows? But in that moment, he was captivated. He was engaged. There was something that he wanted. He was not uncomfortable being close. He got closer and closer and closer, right? So there's this element of seduction, I think, that happens when you are creating something that's mysterious, that's inviting people in, and that's beautiful, right? Or that, you know, even the symbols themselves can be mysterious, and people want to lean in and look closer to try to understand. And at the same time, because it's not literal, I am a big fan of a graphic tee, or of like a statement tee that just shouts some stuff out, right? But you know, on a canvas, you know, without like a written message on the canvas, it actually leaves enough room for people to be able to insert their own experience, and insert their own, you know, think about themselves, think about their stories, think about connections that they can make to the various elements in the work. And so I feel like it's seductive, and I don't know if the world could be moved in any direction without art. I think art is crucial.
Nice. I like that. I like a seductive environmentalism. It doesn't have to be about guilt and shame. It
Right.
can be a little sexy. It can be invitational. It can be delicious.
Exactly. As long as we get there, let's just keep going in that direction. Yeah.
Excellent. Connie or Manoush, any thoughts?
I can say that, you know, as I said before, that I get all inspiration intuitively. I think one of the things when you have directly these messages, I feel like the work becomes very didactic, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not against that, but I think I have this concept, and for myself, in my opinion, when you do a lot of research, and yes, I want to talk about like use less, you know, don't waste water, you know, do this certain things. I think everyone can learn them anywhere. But I think if I use how I feel and how I look at the value of, you know, the nature, the value of the environment, the value of the ecosystem in my life, but then use my emotions and bring it with my own language, I think it is some sort of bringing these emotions to other people, because so many people can resonate with the same thing that I do. And I think for me is also specifically have a lot with the ritual. I'm very interested in ritual. And I think, as Connie earlier mentioned, this time that you spend in nature is so sacred. It's so valuable for learning, for hearing, for listening to what is you know, environment telling you. And it's not necessary that I'm going to do this. Like I use this material in my work, which is the space blanket that is used, and back then I never knew that what it is, but I really loved and was fascinated with the reflection, and I use it. But then later on learned that, oh yeah, this is something that, you know, emergency blanket is for emergency. People are using, they have the emergency kit. They also have for refugees, they use it, and they also have it for picnics. So there's so many levels of thinking about there are many different meanings for one material that is used differently, but then how you react and how you respond and how you use it to bring it in your work, I think that's some sort of like the common place or common space that we all as an artist can put it back for public. I think, I mean, not necessarily also even you have to create art for people. Sometimes literally for myself, I just do it for my sake, not that I'm definitely going to make this, that I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to give it to someone, or, you know, it's just like for my own sake. I think that's just a healthy way to think and look at it. I hope I answer it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, even self-transformative art is important. It doesn't always have to be for the public. Yeah, beautiful point. Connie, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. When I heard this question, my first thought, you know, is humans are naturally inquisitive, whether we like to, we say ignorance is bliss, but we are actually very naturally inquisitive. And so I think, well, also this comes from the standpoint of being a spiritually inclined person. I just have never believed that science explains everything. And I really mean everything, because sometimes that gets a little skewed. For example, I think we need that fact. We need action. We need some sort of direction, but the majority of the people aren't going to understand why they're doing something. And so, where art kind of comes in is it's a little bit of a thread. And I think, after people watch work or engage with stuff and they're like, man, like I feel like I've learned something from this. I understand why it's important. Now what? That's where the fact kind of comes in now, right? Because now you've kind of moved someone more intrinsically. So they're more likely to kind of keep up with whatever you might be telling them, but also too, it feels meaningful and purposeful versus like just something else that they have to do. And I think one thing that art just does really well is kind of incite that inquisitive side in people. There's many times where I've gone to the museum, seen a piece, and then just like go looked up some stuff on the artist or looked on the street differently, just like right after leaving the exhibit, or it just having like a different experience afterwards. But then, I think when you see stuff enough and you've been entrenched enough and you kind of started to kind of sit with it, then it's almost easier to accept what people may have been telling you all along, because now it just doesn't come from a third cold party. It feels like something that you've well researched and kind of have a backbone for and just can really understand like why you're making certain choices. And so, kind of like connecting it back to the forefront, that ability to really be drawn in, as Nicole was talking about, I think is important, just because yes, like we use art to talk about things, but it's also pretty and people like pretty things, but people are also curious. And so kind of working the three together to kind of, incite people to move in the right direction, then that means we've done a good job.
Nice. I like that a lot. It's inciting, inviting, seductive. And of course, it's one of those things where you're not just inviting people to participate in the natural world in a new way, but also in the social world in a new way, participate in their culture, reconnecting maybe to spirituality or to a religious tradition. One of the things I really like about this whole exhibition, the title, All That We Touch, is really profound to me because that's everything. That includes the interconnections between nature and culture. So I wonder, if we could hear a little bit more about your creative process for each of you. How does your creative process engage with that connection, that crisscross? Where are the boundary crossings between nature and culture that really matter to you? And maybe more generally, how does your personal cultural background and experience inform your work? Whether that's religion, spirituality, ethical values, traditions, social institutions, culture writ large. So yeah, any thoughts on that would be great.
Well, I definitely, in my work, our ritual really, I think, is one of the best words to use to describe my creative process. And I think it's because the skin that I'm in the time and the place that I'm in really mandates a lot of transcendence. It mandates breaking barriers. It mandates, crossing insurmountable odds, and it mandates, in order to do that, you have to reach beyond, right, to somewhere, to something. And for me, in my art making process and also in my personal life, I am a weaver, right? So I'm taking every element that I can, anything that is inspiring, anything that makes sense, and weaving it together in order to kind of build a bridge across something, right? And I can do that in a very kind of physical, concrete, scientific way. In some of my work, I've made pieces that have actual humans, real living humans with their actual living stories represented. And in the rendering of that person, I'm thinking energetically, and I'm sending energy to them, and I'm doing some kind of ritual that I'm hoping transcends time and space and, you know, the ethers that actually reaches that actual person that's depicted, right? And when I think about energy, I can find scientific evidence for that. I can find spiritual evidence for that, right? And also just in general, I think that we can find so much evidence in nature for, you know, for all of the truths, for everything that we're seeking, for all of our goals, for all of our values, for everything, all the change we want people to make, socially, environmentally, we can find evidence in nature, right? And my work really seeks to kind of tease out some of those elements and weave them together in a way that people will be excited to experience.
Wonderful. That's great. Manoush, Connie, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think not necessarily I'm noticing if I get any, direction, or like I literally want to do this because it's related to my culture. This is what I've grown up. But I think artists are representing their lives. And I think for me specifically, what I do is just like how I grew up and how I've been experience nature in my life or in my upbringing, that becomes part of my work. And this is something that makes my identity, as a artist. And so I can't separate it enough. So I can't exactly tell you what is coming from my culture, that I'm using it, that I want to do it. But, there are specifically, I use in the earlier in my work, I've done some, which I think all our Iranian artists do. It's not something totally for myself. We celebrate this Persian New Year, that we grew sabze, which is green plants for celebration of the New Year. And a lot of artists are using these plants for their installations, for their work, make a sculpture, ephemeral things. But not necessarily when I was referencing that, but I think I have always been interested in the process, which is this meditative kind of like a time that you spend for creating things. And that becomes very interesting for me as part of art and, performative action of the performance. That's why I call, like, even my walks, I always call them that they are my performances. But for performative, not everyone is. Sometimes you have audience, but when you are by yourself, it's the experience that you put out there. And what you do is like reflecting on whatever you've been through or experienced with. Yeah.
Nice. That's great examples.
I
Connie.
relate to that sentiment a little bit of what it is tends to be relate versus the how. Because I'd say like my process in pretty much every stage of my life, if you ever see me pack or unpack something, I put everything out on the floor, everything, and then slowly like the pieces like go back into place. And I'd say it's a pretty similar process for art making. I'm pretty scatterbrained of a person, and so there's a need for me to kind of just like brain dump in every single endeavor that I do, and it won't make sense for a long time to anybody, including myself. And so I think I'm also a mover. So I'm talking mostly about film because that was my role for Lungs of the Earth, but I'm actually a dancer first. And I think for me, just in general, there's a special thing about actually setting that time to just like also just make for myself. I'm a busy person that hates to be a busy person. And so there's something nice about actually like setting that time aside to just like explore. I'd say exploration and adventure are definitely something that's really prominent in anything I make in the beginning stages. And I'd say like the cleanup is like the second half. It's like, okay, let me just get it out. And then the second half is like, okay, how do I like actually solidify this concept in a way that makes sense? But it's interesting that we talk about like, how that process kind of tells the stories of our lives. Because this year, in addition to Lungs of the Earth, I did my first personal film. And that film, I didn't realize it at the time, but I didn't realize how much trauma I'd been holding inside myself for so many years. Try not to get too emotional with this. And the film was intense because it made me have to actually confront all those things. And I think it was interesting because it's now a public piece, right? It's being shown as in festivals and etc. But it really started out as like I need to just do this for myself, and I need to kind of create this to get these thoughts out of my head and onto screen. I can't really say paper because that's the medium. Um, and just kind of allowing myself to go through that process. I feel like that's probably how I just work, and I hopefully not everything is as triggering as that film was to make, because that was the process of my life that I was in at the time. But I think, when we think about artists sometimes being like, oh, woo and emotional, I think it's because it's just how, when we're telling the stories, it's not just like we throw together a couple things and whatever. It's a very like, um, there's a conversation kind of going back and forth with your soul a little bit, as I like to say. And it not only relates to who you are, like, how your brain is made up, but your experiences, they all kind of go together. And so I'd say for anything that I've really kind of finished, you tend to see all of that stuff. For Lutch, which is it's because Lungs of the Earth is so long, we have abbreviated it to Lutch. That's how you pronounce the Portuguese acronym. Acronym in Portuguese, excuse me. I think the thing that was the most exciting was being able to just explore the park and really kind of letting all those pieces come together. And then, this film was actually probably the least disorganized I've ever worked, because someone else had done the concept already for me. But I think when it came to editing, it was the same thing, like just slap everything together. And then after we kind of have at least something down, then you start to see the cohesion, like, oh yeah, cool, there's a story here. Let's make it make some sense.
I like that. Order out of chaos. The story comes out of difficult feelings, overwhelming feelings, and then you make art that provides a safe place for people like me to explore those feelings. Right, that the encounter with the work lets me engage with this full panoply of emotions. And that last question, we're getting a little more personal, which I really appreciate hearing about. And now I want to open up questions to our audience, so feel free to add it into the Q&A box. But we already have a couple, and I think one of them follows up really well with what we were just talking about, which is getting a little bit more personal. And I like this question as well, so I'm glad they asked it. When did you know you were an artist? And for each of you, like, when did you know? How did you know? So there's a point when you're not an artist, and then there's another point where you're like, this is what I'm doing. So what were those moments? However protracted they might have been. It might have been gradual. Since you were one, you might have been doing some finger painting, and it turned into something. Who knows? But where were those moments for you?
I can say that I've definitely always been making art for literally since I was very small. And actually, even when I was in middle school, I started taking pretty formal classes around age 11. And then even in middle school and high school, having exhibitions and showing work. But I still didn't think of myself as an artist, even at that point. I'm an 80s baby. So the concept of being an artist formally, like that was your actual job, was a little out of bounds, a little out of reach. And it wasn't quite, I thought it was something that I was doing, but I didn't really connect it to my identity. And then it wasn't really until college when I was inspired, interestingly enough, to apply to college as an art major, then I really started to get comfortable with the idea of calling myself an artist. Even I've been making art for decades, my whole life, been making art, selling art, having shows, and still just was like, oh, I just make art. I'm not really an artist, right? And then it's something I definitely had to grow into.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. What about you, Manoush?
Well, for me, I don't think I ever made this decision to be an artist. I think it just happened to be, following this professionally. I think one of the things for me, I come from the culture or background. I grew up in a religious family, that it's women are supposed to be, housewives and more taking care of family. And this is something that I know a lot. I have a lot of skills. I have done whatever a woman has to know, like traditionally back then, like 50s, 40s. So that was part of like upbringing, a woman has to be artist, and that considered as an art, even though that's craft or whatever you call it, not a high art, it's low art. And so I've been learning that because that's something that I had to do. But I think my family have been supporting thinking about going to school, because you have this school system in Iran is different. I grew up in Iran and I graduated. I have my master and bachelor in Iran. I have my second MFA here in the United States when I moved. But I think for me, my family have been supportive when I came to United States, and I wanted to continue my when I back in Iran. I have been doing a lot of professional, like collaborating with Iranian artists in art and nature, environmental festivals, art festivals. But here I kept continue doing that because I think I found that's the best platform for me to release my emotions, and not necessarily when as I said, I was planning to be an exhibition, being this artist, like doing this, but I've been just using art because I've been really loving and was easier, best form in my life to exist and continue living, I think. And maybe that's the best answer for that. I've answered.
Yeah, not an easy question. It sounds like an easy question. Like,
Yeah.
oh, when I was 14, I said I'm going to be an artist. But no, that's not. Artists don't think that way. It's always more complicated. Even though, like, well, I make art, but I wouldn't call myself an artist. Like, there's a kind of humility to this thing. If you're like, well, there's creativity that moves through me. I don't need to like label myself anything about it. Or even the difference between art and craft, high art and low art. You're like, I don't know. I guess I do craft work or something. And so yeah, I appreciate that. It's more complex of a question than it sounds. Connie, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'm gonna say like I probably always knew, but became more undeniable with each growing year. And I think that's probably it. I think a lot of artists are told to damper it down, and that's what I did for a very long time until uh it no longer could stay dampered down and then burst out. And here we are. So, I think kind of with each passing year, I've just allowed the identity to flow through my veins just that much more. And I think the more I've tapped into that side, right? And being an artist can mean so many different things. It can mean that you have a hobby of just taking photography. It can mean that you've dedicated your whole life to your work. And I think, not allowing that where you fall on that spectrum to kind of distinguish how you describe yourself has been something healing to me because, I do some dance work and some fill work, but it's not my primary job at the moment. And that's okay, even though, I think for a period of my life, I would like to do that. But, if I do end up doing that, I'm not more of an artist then than I am now. And I think kind of allowing that part of me that's just undeniable to just exist as is within this identity is probably the thing that took the most time. So I'd say that that change probably happened my sophomore year of college when I was like, I am so done with being a psych major. And it's a good major, by the way. It just was not the right fit for me. Right. And so I think after that, it was kind of like, oh no, like I knew this is what I was supposed to be doing. And then it was just really figuring out how to carve that path.
Nice. That's great. We have a few questions. We're not going to be able to get to them all, folks, but they're good questions. This one I think follows really well on the last one. Becoming an artist influences other parts of your life, right? So how has your relationship with art influenced other parts of your life or your lifestyle? Which is a giant question that could go on for a while for that.
I think I can answer pretty succinctly. I think that it has the journey that I took as an artist and the journey to finding the ability to use art in this particular way, in this kind of more ritualized way, has definitely helped me to do just that in all the other areas of my life, to be present, to find like the stillness right, in various moments, and in different spheres of my life, career wise, relationship wise, and to try to figure out how to integrate and weave all the important things that I need in order to be able to make a clear decision and find a direction and walk towards, towards the very best thing. So I think it's kind of the process, that ritualistic process of trying to integrate and to move in the best direction. I've definitely been able to apply that to all the areas of my life.
Nice. Yeah, that's the kind of, I know, Manoush had mentioned earlier the self-transformative power of art, and that's exactly that. Manoush, do you want to add anything?
No, I think the same. I don't have anything extra to say.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
healing as well. Healing also.
that's right. Yeah. I remember Nicole mentioned that initially when you're talking. Yeah, the healing seems like such a key part of this, especially when we're talking about intersections of social and environmental justice. Crucial. Well, here's another good one. Did your major in college hurt or help your art? Because some people are going to be suspicious about going to college to study art. Like, no, I want to be wild and free. College is just going to, too tight, confining, and plus the money. So how did it help or hurt?
I think it's been very helpful for me, and I'm not regretting. I've been to school many years, and I still, I think I learned a lot. It was times that damaging your or hurting your feelings, but I think that's worth it, because the harder you become, stronger to believe in what you do and what you make in overall.
I'll let the recent graduate go first. Connie?
I was not an art major.
Oh, that's right.
People
That's
don't
right.
know that. Yeah. I
Okay.
cut my major because I was kind of too far along, but I didn't, that was kind of like a dropped career. But I do like to tell people I am planning on going for an arts degree for my master's. And what I will say about it is I don't really think, I think we equate education to job, and that's kind of a direct line. And if you're going to art school for that, don't do it. I would say it's more of a process of learning how to better engage with yourself and better literally just communicate what you want to through your art. So the real reason why I want to go to art school is to have that experience of engagement.
Nice. Yeah, great recommendation.
Yeah.
Nicole, anything to add?
I can just really briefly say that I think I walked kind of a middle road. I didn't go for an MFA. I have a bachelor's in art from a liberal arts college from HBCU. And so I was able to get kind of like a full college experience and pursue my art. But I will say that I learned most of my technical skills actually as a young child in local art programs. So I had already had the skills that I needed before I got to college, and didn't really, skill wise, I didn't really, get that much from my art degree, but community wise, art history wise, rigor wise, then it was definitely an asset for sure.
I want to add one more thing, Sam.
Yeah.
Sorry, before you move on. I think one of the things for that person who was asking about college, I'm not sure if they consider going or not, but I think one thing that you have to accept, being an artist, if you want to show, exhibit, institutions are very important. Where you go to school, who you are connect, the network is so important to be showing artists. That's something I want to say.
Great. Yeah, that's a great addition. Yeah, it's so important to emphasize that. There's ways to do it where you maximize the potential and the benefit. There's limitations. It's not the whole thing. But I appreciate, as a professor, I'm pro school in general. So thanks so much. Great answers. Great work you're doing. I really appreciate you letting me kind of talk at you and elicit some discussion from you. So that's going to be it for us. I'll go ahead and pass it back to Nell, and she'll give us our final closing.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our artists, Nicole, Connie, and Manoush, as well as to Professor Sam Mickey for offering such a compelling lens, really, for us to explore these works and issues around ecology and culture. I personally just learn so much every time I hear each of you speak about your art practices and Sam, just the wonderful questions that you posed did such a wonderful job of illuminating connections between them in a really wonderful way. So thank you all for such a moving and compelling conversation this evening. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who attended. It was wonderful to have all of you in the audience. We hope that you will join us next week for the events that are happening that I mentioned previously, the Art Hour and the Indigenous Foodways conversation next Wednesday, the 13th. We hope to see you at those as well. So thanks everyone and good evening. Bye.